At battle-scarred Guimarães Castle, he stood alone against legions of Moorish invaders and all the kingdoms of Spain. In the 1420s, Portugal stands on the brink of greatness. Prince Henry the Navigator launches ships into the Atlantic, seeking his nation's fortune in the Indies. In the northern town of Guimarães, the prince's half-brother, Afonso, erects a palace to rival Europe's grandest homes, the Palace of the Dukes of Braganza. The celebrated Don Afonso will never achieve Portugal's throne. Yet daring campaigns in Africa have brought him plunder and fame, and a prudent marriage has made him richer than the king. Freedom from invaders allows Don Afonso to prosper, like Portugal itself. For peace in his time, the Duke is indebted to a knight from a violent era, one who fought for freedom within sight of the palace walls. Once mighty Guimarães Castle guarded the fragile hopes of Portuguese independence and earned this region the name the Cradle of Portugal. Its 12th century master was said to be able to cleave a man in two with a single blow of his sword. He was Afonso Henriques, and the nation he forged in steel and blood has remained independent for nearly 8 centuries since his death. The story of Portugal's birth begins with him and the founding of Guimarães Castle. In the 10th century, on the site of this church, a devout noblewoman builds a monastery. But it is no haven. Bands of Normans, pirates, and Moors freely plunder the Temple of Christ. To protect it, the noble lady erects a tower nearby on Mount Letito, on a bed of granite. During the next century, the tower is enlarged to a height of 100 feet, and manned by stalwart Christian soldiers. Guimarães Castle grows into the North Country's most imposing stronghold, whose site could prompt a change of heart in even the most resolute raider. All the mighty castle lacks is a king. In 1111, inside the castle compound, the bells of the Church of San Miguel announce a baptism. According to legend, the noble birth is disappointing. A boy, but scrawny and crippled, unlikely to survive infancy. Yet if he does, the child has fine prospects. His father is Henry of Burgundy, Count of Portugal. Portugal is now a vassal county to the powerful King of Castile and Leon. The sickly infant is the grandson of this great king. As Portugal's chief administrator, Count Henry lives with his family in the castle, which was splendid in his time. He's both tax collector and judge. His lively court is a perfect school for a future king. Portugal's peasants come to Guimarães to pay taxes, usually with their harvests. In the cellar of the main tower, the Count's men measure out grain in granite cups to make sure the Count receives his due. Nobles from the region appear at court to perform military service and seek justice. Henry's sheriffs report on the state of his domain and haul in criminals to be punished. While awaiting judgment, they are locked in the jail, within sight of the hanging tower. The condemned have just a short climb to their final reward. Yet defending Portugal County from Moorish raiders is the Count's first responsibility. This is hazardous duty indeed. For 400 years, fierce Moorish dynasties have held much of the Iberian Peninsula in a stranglehold. Guimarães is Christianity's western outpost, isolated, undermanned, in constant threat of being overrun. Outnumbered, Henry of Burgundy refortifies the castle, enlarging the inner fort to 20,000 square feet. He builds many of the strong points that will protect Guimarães through 400 years of battle. Dense granite walls, 2 stories high and as much as 10 feet thick, protect both the castle and the town. Digging under the walls is impossible, owing to the granite foundation of Mount Letito. In total, 9 stout towers guard Guimarães. Each, as well as the curtain wall, is manned by archers. 4 of these towers protect the castle's 2 huge gateways. Should an attacker somehow penetrate the walls, defenders could retreat to the donjon and pull up its drawbridge, making the tower a fortress unto itself. Despite repeated sieges, no enemy ever captured Guimarães. Embattled but invincible, it was a fortress where ideas of independence could firmly take root. In 1112, as Portugal is beset by invaders, Henry of Burgundy dies. Afonso Henriques, his once crippled son, answers Portugal's call to arms. By then, Afonso has grown into a robust young man, skillful in combat and cured of his deformities, he claims, by God. At 14, he takes the audacious step of knighting himself. Henceforth, he is Prince of Portugal. With God's help, he will free his country, but not only from the Moors. Afonso will fight for liberty from mighty Castile and Leon.
TLC will return with Great Castles of Europe. Biblical Earthquakes and Ancient Egypt, Monday beginning at 8 on TLC.
With increasing boldness, Afonso and his mother rule Portugal, forgetful of their feudal ties to Leon and Castile. In 1127, the king's army pays a visit to Guimarães and gives them a fiery reminder. Although vastly outnumbered, Afonso refuses to surrender. Finally, the young prince's tutor negotiates a treaty of peace, one Afonso will never honor. Never again would Portugal yield to a foreign crown. In the eyes of the Christian world, Afonso becomes nothing more than a brigand. A crisis closer to home stands between Afonso and complete control. His mother has formed dangerous ties with a neighboring state. The young rebel expels her from Portugal and sets out on a career of battle. From Guimarães, the county's new ruler openly rebels against the King of Leon and Castile and renews his raids against Moorish settlements. Fighting alongside him are a cadre of noblemen who share the dream of an independent Portugal. Guimarães serves as headquarters for their early attempts to break the back of the Moorish occupation. In this era, Afonso emerges as a rebel king and his nation's fiercest gladiator, a leader able to turn the tide of battle through sheer force of character. Always he seeks divine guidance before battle. Never does he doubt that the cause of Portugal is holy. With nearly supernatural resolve, Afonso pushes out Portugal's borders on every frontier and drives the persistent Moors south, all the while ruling a kingdom. By 1140, Afonso has extended Portugal's southern border beyond Coimbra, which he names the new capital. After 3 sieges, he finally captures Leiria Castle, a deadly Moorish stronghold. He makes it his southern base of operations. Now emboldened by his victories, Afonso calls himself king. From Leiria, the king wins still greater battles in the south, robbing the Moors of every foothold in the region. Finally, in 1147, Lisbon falls. At each victory, Afonso stakes his claim on behalf of Portugal and Christianity with elaborate town charters. In 1179, 40 years after Afonso began his crusade, the Pope finally recognizes him as Portugal's king. Just 6 years later, in 1185, King Afonso Henriques dies, remarkably of old age. He is 74. Ultimately, he is buried in royal splendor at Coimbra, laid to rest as all of Christendom grieve, a king carrying an expression of resolve into the next world.
TLC will return with Great Castles of Europe.
After driving out the Moors, the Portuguese set up outposts in Africa. From international trade, the new nation prospered. Portugal's kings continued to visit Leiria Castle, which became a center for politics. Here, royalty sent their children to be educated. And it was at Leiria in the late 14th century that another Afonso, the first Duke of Braganza, came of age. He thrived under the tutorship of the castle's scholars and grew into the kingdom's most eligible bachelor. Around 1420, his father-in-law presented Don Afonso with another, more famous fortress, Guimarães. The Duke of Braganza and his wife, heiress to Portugal's wealthiest house, chose to make it their home. But the birthplace of Portuguese independence was by now uninhabitable, clearly unfit for aristocracy. It would never regain the glory of its golden age. Yet in the Duke of Braganza, the cradle of Portugal had found a reverent patron. In the church of San Miguel, where Afonso Enriquez was baptized, are entombed some of the nobles who rallied round the future king. Already in the 15th century, Guimarães was becoming enshrouded in myths of Portugal's earliest days. Little is known of King Afonso's fallen comrades. Their identities are concealed in a lost language of symbols. Yet here are the only remaining traces of Portugal's founding fathers, personal memorials that make the church the nation's most hallowed ground. Moved by the sacred site, the Duke of Braganza set out to build a home that would honor Portugal's heroes and take its place among the great palaces of Europe. To create it, he hired the French architect Master Amthome, renowned designer of chateaux in the Loire Valley. The result is Guimarães' Palace of the Dukes. This elegant assemblage of round chimneys and sloped roofs had never been seen on the Iberian Peninsula. In the marriage of ancient castle and royal palace, the Middle Ages gave way to the emerging Renaissance. For Portugal, the palace signaled a break with the rough-hewn and bloody past and a step into the prosperous new age. It was a wonder in its time. Above the entrance, the House of Braganza's coat of arms hangs askew, signifying the Duke's bastard origins. Yet he became an accomplished equestrian, scholar, and like his famous forebear, a man-at-arms. Like King Afonso, the Duke was a leader for his time, one of the Renaissance's first Renaissance men. For 7 years he fought in Portuguese raids intended to carve out an empire in Morocco, awarded with property and privilege, and made Portugal's ambassador to the royal courts. During the Duke's frequent absences, construction at the palace ceased, sometimes for years. Ultimately, the celebrated noble returned, richer in fame and booty. With it, he established a standard of luxury unknown in Portugal. This room is called the Chamber of the Wasted Steps, named in sympathy for nobles who waited in vain for an audience with the Duke. Windows were the 15th century's ultimate symbol of luxury. The Duke installed hundreds to show off majestic rooms like the Great Hall, the site of state celebrations. The palace of the Dukes boasted 70 fireplaces and even more chimneys. Many of these are facades, fabricated to display the Duke's and Portugal's prosperity. Don Afonso furnished his palace with the spoils of the North African War. While campaigning in Morocco, he ordered his carpenters and masons to dismantle 70 columns of marble and jasper. He installed 8 in the entrance of the palace chapel. In the palace's largest room, the banqueting hall, the Duke entertained foreign dignitaries. He could seat 100 guests at his dining table. The wealthy ambassador's nation now held a virtual monopoly on trade with Morocco, whose merchant capitals they seized by force. This tapestry celebrates a Portuguese victory at Argila. There, armor and firearms gave the Portuguese a decisive advantage over their enemies. Yet their attacks hindered the very commerce they sought to exploit, and the invasions robbed rural Portugal of much-needed manpower. Today, the compound enclosing the king's castle and the palace of the dukes is an official state residence visited by Portugal's presidents. Once there was even talk of moving the capital to the place known as the Cradle of Portugal, so that Guimarães might again receive a king.
The first king of Portugal built it, and almost 1,000 years later, it's still standing, now housing the nation's president. We'll take you there.
We'll take you to France next week at this same time on another world premiere episode of Great Castles of Europe. But now, there really are sea monsters to be found in prehistory, next on Paleo World. Body Atlas, Wednesday nights at 8:30 on the Learning Channel.